All right, welcome everybody. We're live here from Guusto headquarters slash my shed in the backyard. I'm joined today by Danielle, and we'll get into some introductions here. We'll give kind of folks a few moments to get checked in. When you're joining us here, we'd love to hear in the chat what's your name, where are you from. If you're comfortable, put your LinkedIn profile there so that our audience members can kind of connect with each other. Today, we're here to talk all about HR budget planning and aligning those investments with business impact. And so I'm joined today by Danielle Balow. Danielle, do you want to do a quick introduction for the audience?
Yeah, thanks. So I lead digital transformation at a company called Clickboarding. And really, what I do within the Clickboarding team is I leverage my expertise within the HR tech ecosystem to help our clients drive strategic, value-focused improvements in how they hire, how they onboard, how they run through pivotal moments within an employee experience that ultimately makes an impact on improving their processes, their bottom line, and creates an elevated experience for not just the employee or employees that are going through that experience, but also for the team that supports it.
Awesome. And we were chatting a little bit before, but you've had experience kind of being on the other side, kind of being in that HR role and in kind of the buyer seat and, kind of taking proposals and uh, ROI calculations to your executive teams. Can you tell us just a little bit about kind of your former experience before clipboarding?
Yeah, yeah. I've been in the people leadership space my entire career, whether it be directly within an HR function or leading an operational team, sales team, etc. So kind of a mixed bag, but I think it makes me pretty dangerous in my current position because I can work with lots of different people from various industries. But truly, I have experience in a lot of different aspects of HR, technology, rolling out new technologies, and I'd say pretty recently, before my career here, a big part of what I did was roll out a new ERP system for manufacturing floor and
Mm,
facility. And being in that end user role, it's really about assessing what do we need, what are our team's pain points, and then what's best for my team, and making that strategic decision so that whatever the selection and the tech that was used was going to make a big impact, right? So taking away time spent keying in data points, right, to really making action-based decisions and rolling out a tech that would essentially work for the team and the business. So lots of fun experience there that I'm happy to share today.
that's
And
all.
I'll geek out with you for the next hour on that.
Great. And if folks have questions kind of along the way, by all means, put those in the chat. Danielle and I both have access to that, so we'll be able to kind of keep an eye on the chat there. So welcome, Tyla, Alicia, Kyle from Toronto, Brenda from California. Thanks for joining us today. Again, my name is Skay. I'm one of the founders here at Guusto. I love geeking out on all things kind of employee recognition and engagement. So Danielle, super pumped to kind of have you here. Also, really interesting to hear that you've got kind of experience working in industries like manufacturing, where you've got this kind of cohort of workers that are kind of out on the floor or kind of not in the office, right? And trying to build HR programs that kind of bridge that divide between kind of like the corporate office workers that are sitting at desks and those that might be out kind of on the front lines. So this is going to be fun. So today's topic is all about kind of demonstrating value to kind of the executive team, aligning investments around kind of business impact and getting approval for those budgets. So maybe we can kind of start just right at the top and like what from your experience, like what are the most common like obstacles that HR teams tend to face when trying to kind of like secure budget approval, and how have you seen these kind of overcome?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times people just know, right? Like they know they need something. And oftentimes, your gut is right, but then you have to back that up with data and facts versus assumptions or statements like I feel. And those statements are okay and very valid. But you have to be you have to really spin a tale if you only have I feel statements, right? So now, how do you illustrate and very clearly articulate what your need or problem is? And it can't just be you in that story, right? So you have to gain momentum by how it impacts teams or areas across the business. So when you think about what are actual costs, so what is impacting your business? Is it turnover? Is it low engagement? Are you seeing attrition after 3 months, 6 months, a year? And what does that mean? Right? So we know it's a problem, but what is that cost associated with said problem? Because that's really where money starts to talk. And and I don't mean that in really like any way other than, okay, so we have 30% turnover. Okay, where is it on the manufacturing floor, like you were talking about before? So my previous position, and the answer generally is yes. So you may have decent turnover in certain parts of the business, but what is the cost to acquire? What is the cost to train? What is the cost to retain and onboard those individuals? And once you can start putting metrics to that, and you can, it's a simple mathematical equation sometimes. And this is where I really geek out because I'm like, all right, time times dollars spent times, whatever those various aspects are, that's where you really start to build a story. Because if you have a team of 1,000 employees and you have 30% turnover, now we're really looking at a story where your CFO is listening, where your business leaders are listening. Because although it feels really nice to have some of these, nice to haves, it's like, well, we have that, right? We have an HRAS, we have an HCM solution, but it's not cutting the mustard today, right? And that's really the story that you have to talk about. And it's just working with your stakeholders. So it's not just CHRO and finance, but it's IT, right? It's security. It's your business end users. So interviewing people. So having those, customer interviews. And when I say customer, I mean your people. Interview your customers to understand what are the biggest pain points in your day. What takes you a long time? And even just having conversations with some people where they might say like, oh, it's not really that big of a deal, I don't mind doing the data entry. Okay, so what's getting pushed because you're doing those types of activities, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's a big bummer for you? And if you don't have the time to do that, you can implement tools, right? Surveys where you can start to gather that information holistically, especially if you're running a large organization with multi-site, multi-function. There's other tools and resources out there as well where you can start aggregating that data and truly building a story around numbers and impact.
Okay, I love that. And what do you say to like the HR person that may not be kind of as strong on the number side of things? It sounds like it's somewhere that you're comfortable, but in my experience in working with a number of kind of HR folks, they might kind of shy away from some of the numbers. So, like, have you seen kind of like some interesting ways to partner with your finance team to kind of get them to kind of fill in the gaps for you?
Yeah, well, there's kind of two thoughts I have there. So it's totally okay not to be a numbers person, and it almost feels a little scary, right? Like what I just said. But that's because I do this every day, and so for me, this is a part of the day to day. But there are tools out there or companies that you can partner with to say like what they have a tool that you can just plug in and say, okay, how many people do you have? What's your average cost or hourly rate, salary, etc. So these are things that any HR representative is going to have available. And then you can say like, okay, well, let's look at industry benchmarks as an example. So the industry says that, the turnover is about X% in your industry. Do you feel like that's high or low? And so you can go through an activity or an exercise just with another partner, right? Or another company to determine what those benchmarks are, what those issues are, so that it doesn't feel as scary. Because you don't have to go through and like with, we're using manufacturing as an example with like a timer and go, okay, how long does it take Danielle to, type in this information? And then, that's a full-time job in and of itself. Some companies have that information and the resources available to do it. Others, it's a little bit more of a squishy, like, where do we start? And then once you start having that dialogue, you refine it. So you look at, okay, this is what we think the problem is. And then, oh, we missed talking to Skay as an example, right? We missed talking to this part of the business. Really drawing out a full circle to make sure that you're saying, okay, well, I have turnover or I have low engagement. What does that mean for finance? What does that mean for IT? What does that mean, obviously, HR, right?
Mhm.
But what does it mean for the business, the hiring managers? Are they fatigued from constantly hiring and retraining and onboarding? The answer is probably yes. And this is where you can really start to build a budget. I actually read a stat and I wrote down, and typically, I think it's making sure that you have a budget. 45% of companies surveyed don't have the know-how or the capabilities to do that. And the fact of the matter is most organizations, technologies, tools out there have something built in where they can help you build that process.
Mm.
It's just kind of being brave enough to take that step and have the conversation.
Well, a couple. You're dropping so many kind of great nuggets here. A couple little takeaways. I love kind of keeping notes, and I'll circle back on some stuff. But something I hadn't heard there before was kind of going through this exercise with a peer, right? So a lot of HR folks, you're part of these different HR communities. Maybe it's specific to the industry, right? Like HR for manufacturing executives in the state of Illinois. So pair up with some of your folks there, and like, hey, how are you kind of measuring some of these pieces that can help to build the story? And then the other piece that I love there was around going beyond just the survey is great, right? Like we need to do kind of the broader survey to get some of the data analytics, but go talk to the hiring manager, or go talk to kind of the foreman on the floor that is dealing with poor engagement, and get the story directly from them, and kind of build some of that anecdotal kind of, if you speak to kind of two or three of them and they're all kind of saying the same thing, put some of those quotes into kind of the story that you're telling, with your pitch to the executive team. So love that. What are Danielle, kind of what are, like, you and I, both of our products, right? Like we're in recognition rewards, clipboarding, kind of, the end-to-end kind of employee kind of experience there. Um, what are some kind of HR initiatives that often kind of get labeled as nice to haves, like in,
Yeah.
both of our kind of spaces, and why are these kind of really essential for the long-term success of a company?
Yeah, I love that question because that is truly what finance is going to ask your HR representative, right? Because typically HR is like, we need these things, or your CHRO is going to say, okay, well, you get this or that. Which one are you going to choose? And the fact of the matter is that onboarding and engagement can sometimes be a black hole for the business. And I'm not talking about your HR folks, but it's a big umbrella. So what exactly does engagement mean? What does that look like? What does onboarding mean? Is some people think it's training. Some people think it's just creating a plan of whoever Danielle has to meet as she joins her, new role or position. And so part of that, I think, is you have to define it. But the other part too is you have to just acknowledge, like, people get hired, whether they're hired well or whether they actually show up and decide to stay, that's the sticky wicket, right? And when you think about, like, once organizations, you can put data to the problems of manual processes, engagement, turnover, compliance, risk, right? That becomes a matter of budget planning and selection and creating space for it in your P&L. So it's defining, what does that actually mean to our organization, identifying who's involved in that process, and then start to put data to it. And it doesn't have to be this super detailed, process walk, and certainly recommend that, right? So interview your end users and grab some data. But it can be just benchmarks. This is what's happening. And start to build your story, because you typically, for products like ours, it's multiple stakeholders that are a part of this decision making factor, and you have to be able to outline what a product or a solution does that your current technology doesn't do, and also decide as an organization, because it just can't be you, right? Is good enough, or
Mm-hmm.
are you really wanting to raise the stakes and elevate the experience, the process? And if you are, then I suggest doing those activities.
Okay, great. I'm going to kind of push you on this a little bit. So you mentioned kind of onboarding, right? And some examples that you kind of pulled out there in terms of kind of telling that story was around kind of time to the employee kind of being ready to be fully operational. And so maybe we could kind of take that from 60 days down to kind of 45 days. what is that going to do in terms of like productivity for the organization?
Yeah.
Similarly, kind of retention, right? A lot of these frontline organizations really struggle, like retail, healthcare, with that frontline workforce to kind of retain people past the 60-90 day mark, right? They'll have lots of people kind of coming in and just getting them through the training and getting them kind of past that first 3 month window is retention starts to get a lot better there. So there's definitely some interesting ones that we can kind of measure there with onboarding. um, when we get into some of the more kind of like intangible investments, like, hey, we're trying to improve company culture or drive kind of employee well-being. um, what have you seen kind of done really well, either at clipboarding or in your experience, to kind of measure things there?
Yeah. Well, I have a couple stories actually. One is a little bit more on the onboarding piece and time to productivity, and then the other is more on the cultural and the experience aspect. So I may ask you to keep me honest here if I get lost on one story versus the other. So when we think about time to productivity, we worked with a national retailer, and a big part of their first hiring process was all of day one for all of store representatives, distribution, whoever is spent in the back training room or the break room, right, of a store, and
Mm-hmm.
it's filling out paperwork. And it's signing here, signing there, checking a box, putting your direct deposit information in. And you're paying somebody, well, maybe it's $15 an hour, but when you're hiring thousands of people seasonally, you're literally wasting that money.
Mm.
Or just, I mean, they're crucial aspects of things you have to do, but there's a better way to do it, right? You can use technology. Check out what your current technology offers you. Can it
Mm.
do that for you? Can it automate? If it doesn't, look at the investment, right? So a big part of what we do is exactly that, is that automated experience, so that you're taking out some of like the non fun parts of the HR aspect, and you're taking that off of your HR person's plate so that they can actually make those human connections, or have those informational interviews. But that's really critical, and those are hard dollars. So if you're paying people for even just half of a day to sit and go through paperwork and a little bit of orientation, I bet there's something even within your tech stack today that could impact a little bit of that. If
Yeah.
not, there's other tools and technologies out there.
Just to jump in on this, and then we'll circle back on your second one there, because we were just at a couple of partner conferences for Dayforce and UKG last week,
Yeah.
and both of them highlighted the need to do a better job of getting their customers to actually use the products that they've already bought, to the fullest. And even here at Guusto, right, we often have customers kind of come for like a quarterly business kind of review, and they're like, oh, I didn't even know that you guys did that, like.
Yeah.
So I love the call out there. There's an existing tech stack in place. If you've got kind of an HCM, it's likely that it's got some survey capability built into it or some other things. So
Well, and
look.
that's so true. And
Yeah.
that's the thing too. And the previous career, we had an SAP, or like an ERP system that was, somewhat antiquated, and it just hadn't been, upgraded in a while. And the president of our company said, like, we have to figure out, like, use it to the max and the fullest. And we proved that. So we didn't get to the fancy software that we wanted right away, right? But we had to prove for about a year and document and really and try and use different parts of that ERP system to demonstrate that this is something that we needed and that the cost was going to justify the outcome of what we were looking for.
Mm.
So yes, look at what your current tech stack does. And if you feel like, listen, I've been there, done that, I've been using it, I'm a subject matter expert, that might be the time to go external.
Okay. Okay. So let's circle back now on kind of some of the impact of initiatives kind of around past onboarding. So like once we get into kind of employee engagement programs and professional development, things like that, what have you seen kind of work really well there?
Yeah, so another story, different vertical, so healthcare. We worked with a client that was seeing really kind of high satisfaction across the board for the first 3 months, and then it took kind of a nosedive in month
Mm.
6. It was like, okay, why, right? So they have a survey and retention tool built in, so they were able to aggregate that data and figure out, like, okay, is it employee satisfaction? Is it, happiness with supervision? And ultimately, it was, and it's kind of interesting, right? But in healthcare, they were like, I'm not doing what I thought I was going to be doing, and I
Hmm.
don't feel like I'm getting recognized. So it was
Hmm.
two main problems. And so that really helps people figure out, okay, so these are the problems. And then it helps you figure out, well, what are we going to do about it? Right. So the one piece on level setting, you can have better, job boards or advertising for key roles during the recruitment process. If you have an onboarding technology, you can talk about that at the beginning. You can implement key things within your training. So these are all things that this client did. And then they also worked with an engagement platform to bring in opportunities for rewards, recognition. And sometimes it's like a Starbucks gift card, right? Like, hey, have coffee on us. We really appreciate you and what you're doing. And we actually do that internally at Clickboarding. Or if you're a 100% remote company, you can send out a gift card for lunch if you have all day meetings. Say,
Hmm.
lunch is on us, right?
Right.
These are just examples, but those little things make a really big difference. And think about that cost of acquisition, especially for like a leadership role or something like that. That takes a really long time to bring in the right person, train them, and then get them productive and making an impact on the business. And if they're not feeling appreciated or if they're not feeling heard, there's some things that you can do that are pretty simple. And it's like, okay, so, do I want to pay for this engagement tool, or do I want to pay for losing all of these leaders over and over again?
Hmm. And
Yeah.
we've seen kind of work really well because you talking about kind of healthcare example here. So we've got a couple handful of clients in the healthcare space. What they'll do is they'll actually run pilots for various programs at kind of one hospital or kind of a group of hospitals, and then they'll look at kind of the data from that group compared to other districts or other hospitals, and say, hey, we've been running this program for six
Yeah.
months, 12 months, whatever it is, and look at what it's done around kind of employee engagement, and maybe kind of hospitals are driving towards some outcome like positive patient outcomes or customer satisfaction, something like that. And so tying it back to the business impact that your CFO and executive team are going to kind of resonate with. Now, did I lose you? Are you still there, Danielle?
I am here. It just went blank. I'll see if I can flip to a different webcam.
All good. Well, while you're doing that, the where I'd love to kind of like dig in there, like, so let's say I don't have the luxury of kind of having multiple locations. Everybody's kind of on site one area, so maybe we could do this kind of department by department or something. But what happens like when you're running multiple kind of HR initiatives at the same time? So maybe, kind of you've identified recognition and rewards is an area that you need to improve, but also employee development and training. And so, you're running two or maybe even three different kind of HR programs at the same time, all trying to drive towards kind of the same outcome or kind of HR metric. What have you like? How have you seen kind of companies handle that one?
In terms of like how they quantify, that business impact.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
there's so many things kind of running in parallel. So how do I, specifically draw a line from this program did X?
Yeah. Well, and again, that might feel like a momentous task, but it's really not, right? If you take the time to focus on creating that plan or tie this aspect is related to this initiative, but you do need to start with a baseline to build your case. So, for example, how long is it taking you to get people through task-oriented activities like getting set up in payroll in your payroll system? How many hires or terminations are issued? Their federal and state-specific documents in a timely fashion. That's a risk, by the way, a huge thing we're seeing in industry-wide. What's your turnover? Multiply that by the cost to hire metric, right? Like, is your engagement high? To your point, Skay, you were talking before about, is it high or low? And how do you know? Do you have tools to measure that? And that kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning is, do you feel like it's this way? Or do you have metrics and aspects to really quantify that? So tools are always a great opportunity, or even, if you must, using spreadsheets and tracking. But I think, once you start with creating your case or your baseline, then those efforts are going to help you determine if you have a problem and how impactful those problems are. And that's actually some of the things that we do with some of our customers is, we'll do a little bit of an informational interview, and then we'll try and figure out and quantify how big of a problem is this? Is it because you just hear from a certain group a lot, but it
Mhm.
really is only impacting, like, I don't know, $10,000 a year? Or is this impacting your business globally? And this is a huge, 100,000 multi-million dollar issue. And once you start to understand what the problems are and quantify, it becomes a matter of, sometimes we use the ICE principle, so impact, control, and ease.
Mm.
And then it's really starting to prioritize.
Yeah. Yeah. I often like putting the R at the front of that too, the rice, right? Like what's going to be kind of the reach for the program. And so what I'm hearing from you then is like when you are, looking at potentially running multiple HR programs in parallel, which is we're all doing, right? Like we've all got kind of like a portfolio of kind of programs running in parallel. It's really key to dig in and understand the various problems that each of them is trying to solve, and then kind of measuring how well you're actually doing that, and whether that's kind of through surveys or kind of looking at some sort of business results. So um, like that, in a similar vein, when we're trying to balance between kind of like long-term initiatives and kind of short-term budgetary constraints. So, maybe I'm kind of doing budgets quarterly or annually, but I've got a program that's going to take me kind of like a few years to really kind of roll out. How have you seen kind of HR professionals manage that one?
Yeah, well, and again, I think that kind of ties to the theme of feeling overwhelmed, right? Like you can't boil the ocean and do everything at once. So that's that prioritization aspect in terms of how impactful is this? How much control do I have over making a change, and or how easy is it to make said change or make an upgrade, use something new, use a different tool, right? For example, like when you think about if you're ranking it that way, you could even do a whiteboard exercise or give everybody post-its, choose your tool or medium, right? Um, and you could have people write down like their big pain points in a specific part of the business. You could talk with hiring managers, leaders. You can talk with folks, frontline workers. And then once you start to aggregate and figure out like key themes and what you're hearing from your team, that's when you can start to do some of the prioritization, because there might be things that you just have to do to keep the business running. You might have, like, maybe your payroll, your subscription is ending and you have to do a new one. You just have to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you can start to articulate what must be done and then what you would really like to do, that's going to help you get a plan in place and also help you build your case and be organized so that you're not going to your CFO or your CHRO and saying like, hey, I want to do this, and next month can I do that too? Have a plan, model it out, and talk with your stakeholders and gain allies and alignment along the way.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And we, one of the things that we often kind of advise clients on is taking like a crawl, walk, run approach. So for example, in the recognition space, rather than kind of rolling out multiple programs kind of all at once, I want to do a milestone program. I want to, give all my managers budgets to do spot bonuses. I want to run this peer-to-peer program, and I know I've got, some wellness challenges, and what should kind of take place over kind of a 3-year period. You try launching all at the same time, and you see kind of like, hey, there's a lot of excitement, and then it's all too complex and confusing, and engagement kind of drops right off. Versus kind of rolling things out in stages, right? And so you get to your point there. If you roll out just a top down kind of manager program to begin, or milestone program to begin, you can really get some of those kind of champions involved, right? And I could pilot programs within kind of departments or locations or sectors.
Absolutely.
And once you've got kind of some of those case studies, you can build from there and expand your program versus kind of having a huge a huge time to like prep everything and then do this big launch, and then things kind of fall flat and you get to the end of kind of year one, and you're having to like relaunch things. And so it's just much better to kind of do that scaled approach where you're going to continue to kind of see better and better kind of results and be able to kind of demonstrate those back to your executive teams.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost like an advertising aspect, right?
Mm.
So if you bring on a new tool or initiative, so a lot of what we're talking about is just building the budget to do it and saying, like, we believe that we are going to see an impact in these areas. The key, and your partners, your tech partners are going to work with you right along with like just every step of the way. But the key is to then continue to show, like, here's where we started and this is where we are, and really kind of celebrate those milestones too.
Mm.
And it's not just with the decision makers, but it's with your end users. So remember before when you were telling me about how you just feel like you're on this hamster wheel and you can't get off like this turnover thing where you just keep hiring people, training them, onboarding them, and then they leave. Well, we implemented this and we cut that down by 15%. How great is that? Right? Yeah, that's a big number, or whatever your number is. So part of it is, I think, proving the business case and then celebrating the wins, because sometimes people get so wrapped up in the day-to-day minutia that we forget about the impact that it initially had and continues to have on the business.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So kind of at outset, kind of almost setting those milestones in advance so that you're when you reach them kind of there's a bit of a forcing function there to go and kind of celebrate that with the team, which will just kind of help you to build kind of more momentum around those programs. So in working with kind of other departments, other executives, to kind of build your case for budget and HR investment, what sort of like best practices have you seen, Danielle?
Yeah, a little bit of what we were just talking about, right? So holding monthly or quarterly reviews with your customers or your end users, business users. How are things going? Are you having the same pain points? Are you experiencing other ones? What are the things that are going well, and what are the things that aren't going well? I think it's really important actually to look at both, because
Mm.
sometimes it gets really easy to think about the things that you just don't like about your day to day, or you know whatever kind of those issues are that continue to rise up. But you can also, we always start some of our meetings with what we call a good news check in, and it can be personal or business related. But like, hey, my kid learned how to ride her bike last night. So just balancing the positive with some of the things that we can continue to work on. But truly, it's that continued check in terms of what's going well, how are things going, do we need to check and adjust at all? And so you talk about pilot programs. I think that's a great example, right? So we piloted this and it may be going well, and what can we tweak, and how can we make it even better? I think if you just kind of like, one of my colleagues calls it a set it and forget it, that's great, right? It works. But if you don't kind of revisit and invest and make sure that you're leveraging the most recent releases, features, aspects, you may not be, leveraging some of the things that will continue to impact your business and bottom line.
Hmm. So that's kind of with your clients and your customers. How about kind of with internally, like within your organization, when you're trying to get approval from those executive teams? How how have you seen kind of HR leaders have success in partnering with their CFO or their COO, or other kind of other departments?
Yeah. Well, you don't want to come in guns blazing. um, so when you're partnering with others on the executive team or even your colleagues at VP, director, whatever level, right?
Hmm.
Meet them where they're at. Understand what their priorities are.
Mm.
Share with them what yours are, and just say, like, I need your buy-in. I need your approval. What is the process to get something like this approved? Oftentimes what we see is that, you could go every single step of the way, like you're ready to bring on or implement this new HRIS, for example, and then it's like, oh, I didn't go through the security review. Shoot. Right? So working with IT, not just finance, other parts of the business, to understand what, what are their priorities and share with them what yours are and understand the process that you need to go through to ensure that you're dotting your I, crossing your T's. And it sounds laborious, and it can be sometimes, and other times it's pretty straightforward. It's like fill out this form and it'll get slotted for next year's budget, right?
Hmm.
It really depends on your business and organization.
Yeah, and I love that kind of piece around kind of like understanding the people involved, right? Like what are they measured on? What are their kind of goals, objectives, wishes? How do we how do we make them look good, right? So if we're partnering with another department on a project, how do we make them really succeed if this project kind of goes through? So I love that, and I've got a question here in the chat for us. So thanks, Michelle, calling in from Minneapolis. What's good low hanging fruit opportunity to improve onboarding with quick wins? Well, this is you must be reading my mind. I was just teeing a question like this up. So yeah, Danielle, let's talk about kind of like what sort of high impact HR programs can serve as quick wins.
Yeah, I think a big part of what you want to think about is like, what are things that we're doing today that we don't have to do tomorrow as quick wins?
Mm.
So, whether it's looking at your current tech or your current processes and figure out, like, can we just make a quick shift, and instead of filling out a paper I-9, can we do it online? Right. And that's huge, not just from a risk and compliance perspective, but also getting things done faster and in a more organized fashion. So those are truly quick wins in just one small example. Other bigger ones are, can I put more, or can I centralize more activities in one spot? So we work with some clients. I'll pick on healthcare again, but some of our healthcare clients are like, we send out over 40 communications before day one.
Mm.
Oof, yikes, right? I would get lost in just getting those 40 emails, let alone all the spam that I get and everything else. So, how can you centralize some of those tools, communications, aspects like that? And those are just super easy things that you can do by making a slight tweak or shift. And it's pretty high impact and big rewards.
So in that specific example, you'd move from kind of having 40 emails kind of being sent out probably over the course of a few weeks before the candidate kind of joined the organization. What would you do? Kind of trim it down to kind of like two or three, but then point them all to kind of like a internal kind of intranet system where it had step-by-step directions for them to go through kind of the other 30 pieces of information.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little biased here.
Okay.
But one of the things that we find is that, like with a tool like ours, we have over 97% completion for workflows
Mm.
pre-day one across all industries, and it's because it's a guided experience, right? So if you give a new hire like a choose your own adventure experience before they even start, they may fill out their paperwork, they may not. And if you send them 40 emails, they're going to be super confused. So if you can guide them and say, like, okay, here's your time frame, here's where we need you to go, and that's kind of what I meant too by centralizing things. If you have them do something in one spot, one tool, and it's going to take me 15 minutes, I'm on board with that. Right. But if I have to read through 40 emails and go here and go there, I'm going to have to like wait till my kids go to bed. I'm going to have to turn off the TV and go through this process. And maybe I'll get it all done and maybe I won't. And, I'm saying this slightly tongue in cheek, but truly, this is the experience that most new hires are going through, whether it's an HRIS or different. And it just doesn't have to be that way.
Mm. Yeah, I think about in our space. So kind of recognition. We'll often kind of hear from customers running running kind of non-monetary programs with no incentives around them, and so it's such a low-hanging fruit to drive participation in those programs, and ultimately kind of more recognition happening by not necessarily kind of including rewards in every piece of recognition. Like you see a lot of points providers out there where, hey, Danielle, great job, kind of here's 25 points and it's worth 25 cents or something. But rather just layering in incentives in the form of random draws work really well, where like every week we're going to draw a couple of the shout outs here in front of the group. It'll help to kind of make some of the recognition more visible across the organization. But ultimately, it'll get more people kind of participating. And so, if you want to kind of also look at who's the most involved in programs, or maybe it's learning and development that you're really trying to drive, right, beyond onboarding. It's like, hey, if you get through kind of all of this training before the end of the month, get dinner on us, kind of thing. So having kind of some very simple kind of incentives to drive the behavior that you're looking to kind of achieve there.
That's so true, Skay, because I think sometimes we've just basic human psychology, right? Like everybody loves a drawing because anybody
Mhm.
could win. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, like you said, you don't have to give 25 points or whatever to every single employee, but that in and of itself is engaging. And if you're doing it weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever it is, that's exciting and kind of fun to see if you're going to be the lucky winner,
Yeah,
or if you
totally.
have to like qualify for the drawing, and it's, it could be kind of a double-edged sword, right, where you're getting some type of productivity aspect into entering your name into a drawing. It'd be cool.
Totally. Totally.
I mean, I'd participate.
Great. So you mentioned kind of risk a few times throughout our conversation here. What role does risk management play in HR budget planning, and how can you factor that into your case for investment?
Yeah. And by the way, I should apologize and say I can drop and try and come back on, or maybe I'm just going to use my yogi instructor Zen voice. So Um, but as it goes for risk, I think about it in a couple different ways. One is cost of delay, and then there's actual risk to the business, right? So if we think about cost of delay, it's like, if we don't do this, what is the risk or cost associated? What is the impact to the business? Because
Mm,
you're still a business, and things are still happening. People are still working at your organization. But what is that cost? And like, even if you could make an impact of 2%, 3%, whatever that number is, right? Will that offset, and is it a big enough you know number to merit doing something sooner or prioritizing faster? Because if you don't make a change, right, like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. That's what you have to think about, is if we don't change something, what's going to happen? It's not going to magically get better, right? So I think that's one aspect of risk. And then one of the other big parts of my day to day when we work with clients is just basic risk in terms of like both onboarding and offboarding employees. There are federal and
mm,
state and municipal requirements, and if you don't, provide documentation, certain information to your employees before or when they join, and even when they're exiting, many states and even federally, they have costs and jail time associated with penalties. So you have to think about that too, and that also is a big aspect of building your business case. Like, hey, we're
yeah.
not compliant, right?
Yeah, and to your first point there, kind of cost of delay, will actually go through some of the impacts that recognition and reward programs can have, and sure, there's some efficiencies kind of on for the administrators, but the big ones are around like, hey, can we move the needle on retention? Can we move the needle on productivity? Right? If we get people kind of feeling recognized and collaborating with their peers, like if we move the needle kind of 3-4 points on productivity, the gains are just astronomical when you look
Right.
at some of these frontline organizations. So there's that cost of inaction is kind of what we call it. And then similarly, kind of some of the risks that we see a lot of clients facing is around tax compliance, right? And so they've got all sorts of folks across the organization doing various different things for recognition and rewards, but none of it's kind of being tracked centrally, and people aren't kind of being properly taxed. And so, it is a risk for the organization there. And so if we can kind of centralize that and give their finance teams visibility into the rewards that are being kind of sent out, it'll obviously help the HR teams kind of plan better programs, but also the finance teams to make sure kind of folks are properly being kind of taxed on the income they receive at the organization.
Yeah, well, and talk about making your colleagues' job better,
Mm.
right? That's bringing an experience even to like your finance team. That's going to make it better
Love
for
that one.
their day to day and bottom line.
Yeah, we talked. We were at this conference last week. We had so many payroll folks kind of coming up, and a handful of customers, but primarily kind of prospects, and they were just like, "Oh, really? You can just automate kind of a taxable benefit report for us? Like that's going to change my life." And so thinking
Right.
about kind of HR teams partnering with the finance teams, right? Like, hey, can we go and remove something that's really annoying for them? So love that. So last question here for you, and then if folks kind of tuned in here have more questions for us, we're happy to kind of to stay on with Danielle for a few minutes at the end. But like, how can HR plan for future growth and ensure that the budget supports the development of a resilient kind of scalable team?
Yeah. My biggest piece of advice would be focus on creating programs or leveraging tools and resources that can grow with your organization or that they can scale, right? Um, so flexible programs, strong onboarding, really good engagement, things that work well within your tech stack, right? Like you don't want to bring something in where it's like round peg square hole. Like create an experience in a program that can truly last long term and grow with your business or adjust if your business is going in a different direction. I would say future growth is that's the biggest piece, and then just continue to recognize the impact that your tools have on the business. Some are mission critical. Everybody needs payroll,
Mm-hmm.
right? But others where you believe it's making a positive impact, make sure that you continue to recognize that and celebrate the wins.
And there will be kind of step functions within every organization, right? Like you might be on kind of a small business payroll system, for example, and at some point your organization will kind of outgrow that. And so, smart to kind of then, when you are making that switch, try to find something that will kind of scale with you, at least, kind of to the next step function, and you're not kind of ripping out and replacing programs kind of every couple of years. So uh, Danielle, this has been awesome. I've got kind of a whole lot of notes here. I'll take back to the team, and we've got some different ideas to try internally, but also share with our clients. What would you say, kind of throughout our discussion, was the number one takeaway that you'd hope that listeners kind of take from today's session?
Yeah, I would say be your own advocate and gain allies along the way, right? So HR initiatives are not just nice to haves, but they are essential investments that drive business success. So when you align these initiatives with measurable outcomes and your organization's goals, it becomes a matter of that point of, when and how. So if you heard anything, I would say, make sure that you are partnering and putting or quantifying, and the rest really it'll shake out in a positive way.
Okay, awesome. And I love, when you were talking about kind of scalable solutions there, right? And just how do we kind of create success stories and grow our programs, right? So we need to kind of like demonstrate results and then kind of ask for more budget, and we can kind of grow organically rather than kind of shooting for the moon and kind of having a flop and getting that budget kind of pulled on us the next year. So um, Danielle, thanks so much for kind of taking an hour out of your day to kind of join us here. And if folks, want to connect with you or with clickboarding, where can they find you on LinkedIn? What's the best place?
Yeah, LinkedIn, you could reach out to us. Really, we would love to talk. So if you have questions, a big part of what we do is a little bit of consulting in my part of the business. So
Hmm.
if you do have any questions, be happy to chat. Otherwise, thank you so much, Skay, for having me. Apologies for the camera difficulty. It says it's on. Definitely not. So appreciate you guys sticking with me here.
Oh, no problem at all. And if folks want to learn more kind of about clickboarding, is there anything you want to kind of share there?
I'd say just check out our link, visit our website, and if you have questions, you can always submit a question, and one of my colleagues will reach out. Or, like I said, you can reach out to me too. But if you're thinking about like if you're having issues with retention, time to productivity or speed to hire, compliance, manual processes, give us a shout. We'd be happy to talk and see if we can help.
Okay, awesome. And our team here at Guusto has put together an executive pitch kit. And so it'll, yeah, it looks like they've kind of put the link up there. But it'll kind of walk you through kind of a bunch of this stuff and how to kind of pitch to your executive teams. I think there's some ROI calculators in there and presentation templates. So yeah, go check that out. And whether it's a recognition and rewards program that you're pitching or some sort of onboarding tool, hopefully that can kind of, streamline some of the process, save you some time. So with that, we like to say mucho gusto. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you at the next one.